All right, great. We picked the name. Now let's write a definition. All right. So the first thing around a definition. So I've got an example here of anticipated adverse event. This comes from sort of the FDA definitions, which for those of you who are maybe not US based, that's the Food and Drug Administration has these like definitional standards for pharmaceutical trials and things like that. And so I pulled some definitions down from that. And so there's a definition for this thing called an anticipated adverse event, which is an adverse event, that are not study endpoints and are not expected because they're not in the investigator's brochure. It can be anticipated to occur with some frequency during the course of the trial, regardless of drug exposure. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of details on this for this functional definition. It's a pretty good functional definition. I thought it was interesting. But the first thing to think about if you're writing a definition is that your functional definition should fully define the term, avoiding any hidden assumptions. So I discussed that before, like it can be very hard for a person who has a lot of knowledge to actually figure out how to write a definition in a way that peels back and exposes the assumptions that they have, but it's an important thing to do. So if you're ever, it's a good training for someone writing a definition because, they might say, oh, well, the definition of a customer retention score is, a number that tells us whether or not the customer is going to be retained. It's like, all right, well, that's pretty circular and not very helpful. It's a calculated value that we do based on certain activities, blah, 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 that determines on a numeric scale the ability for them to be retained as of the current date, or whatever those kinds of specific details are necessary. You want to try to pull out in the functional definition. And a good way to think about that is that if you were to then go hand this functional definition off to someone who is a report writer or a technical person in a data system, and you say, hey, extract this data out of this data system, do they have enough detail there? They have enough information to write that extract? Or are they going to come back and say, well, when do you want this? What do you want this? So that should be functionally define that as much as possible. Make sure to note any criteria, restrictions, or scoping or exceptions of things that are included or not included or anything else. And, just try to get all of that detail out. And as I said, functional definition should provide enough specificity to inform a complete technical definition. And then lastly, functional definition should be agnostic to the data system. So you should not be putting in here like, oh, this lives in this particular table and column in the HR field. That's not what this is for. Remember, if you're going to switch data systems, this shouldn't change. Okay. You see in here, though, there's another feature, which is that we have, oh, I have the arrows in wrong, but we have these links. So this says anticipated adverse event is other adverse events that are not. It has investigators. So this is what we call glossary definitions that are connected and related to each other. So you might call them like sub-definitions or just related definitions or links. So if you can use links or references to basic terms from more specific terms. So you have this thing called anticipated adverse event, and it links to adverse event. And you can avoid yourself having to like redefine everything in one definition related to another. And also it can create kind of interesting dependencies and impacts. If you change the definition of adverse event, it might actually want to change the definition of anticipated adverse event. So including sort of, and tools like the Data Cookbook have neat features to basically find and discover and automate the creation of these links and to manage the impact and relationship between those changes. And you see here, you can link through. We also have this concept of which I think is really a neat feature to implement, even if you're doing it on your own, this is a link to a definition that isn't created yet. So this is a to-do item for a definition that I want. So this is this concept of related glossary definitions here become what I call emergent content. So in writing a definition, if I'm going to define what my active program enrollment is, I already defined what program enrollment is. I should be able to link with that. But if I don't have a definition for program enrollment, I realize, oh, well, I should create that definition. And so you might, in writing one definition, end up writing 5 or 6 other definitions, which might seem like, oh my God, you've just created a bunch of work. I was just going to write this one definition, and now I've written 7. Yes, that was more work for you to do this time. But the next person who's coming along and needs to refer to one of those other 6 definitions you created, you've added a lot of value there. So it's a really good way to just sort of build out your glossary by sort of spawning or emerging other definitions from this sort of linking.